Welcome to the greatest show on the internet, and me, your greatest host. Today we're coming at you live from the boiler room, and we're going for a little Mankind vibes, a little Freddy Krueger vibes, a little spooky, a little scary, a little evil, a little devilish, a little vile, a little sickening, because today we have a very scary topic. It's something that haunts your dreams and eats you alive at night, and when you see it, you can't help but go, ah! Because today we're going to be talking about late night talk shows. Ooh. The scariest thing on television. And we're going to be getting into why these talk shows suck so much and why they make you want to punch the hole in your TV screen. Oh, there's a spider in here. That's perfect. Just think of that spider as Jimmy Kimmel or James Corden. Now, if that spider was James Corden, it wouldn't be able to be supported by its web. It would have came crashing down into the floor by now. And it would also be a closeted gay spider. But seriously, these talk shows, they suck. But they used to be good, and we'll get into that later as well. But the main reason, or the first reason I should say, that these talk shows suck is because, one, there's too many of them. Off the bat, we already have a problem. There's way too many. And there's no way to differentiate between them. They're all the same format. They have the same guest. There's nothing unique about them at all. I seriously had a hard time telling Jimmy Kimmel and Jimmy Fallon apart. I mean, it's not just the fact that their name is so similar, but it's the fact that they look exactly the same and they act exactly the same and have the same agendas that they push. But I broke it down in an easy way to remember. Jimmy Kimmel is the one that cries a lot, and Jimmy Fallon is the one that laughs a lot. Okay, just think of it like that. But there's those two. There's James Corden. Saying his name makes me extremely furious, just even having those words come out of my mouth. So let's not talk about him too much. Seth Meyers, who's just a fucking nothing. Just a nothing. Former SNL member. Fucking nothing. Name a Seth Meyer bit or a Seth Meyer joke that really knocks your socks off. And then who else do we have? Oh yes, we have Stephen Colbert. God, how fucking took over for the great David Letterman. That fucking loser took over for the greatest talk show host of all time. That shows you where the state of things really are. Yes, we have all these talk show hosts. And another problem that they all do is they cater to celebrities. The biggest names. Gotta have the biggest names. Gotta have The Rock. Gotta have Ellen. Gotta have Jack Black. You gotta have all these huge stars. Just that they're there to promote their shit. And they're just there for their big name. They're not an entertaining guest. They bring nothing to the show or for an audience watching. And so they're forced to have this fake, extremely written chemistry with each other because these people are idiots and they're not witty and they're not good in that setting. Because what people always forget is that the late night shows are comedy. They're comedy shows. They're not supposed to be, look at, fucking, I don't know, a magazine, a tabloid magazine in a fucking television form. That is not what they are supposed to be. And they're definitely not supposed to be completely political and push that shit. But yes, they were comedians. That's why a comedian is always the host of a talk show. I don't know if you could call some of those people that I mentioned comedians, but by the technical term, that's what they are. But yes, they're all extremely bad. And having these celebrity guests, like I said, it's all very written. Now, talk shows have always been written, but they would go off script, especially when they had guests that were very charismatic, which they did a lot of the time. Actors, they had specific actors on that were witty or charismatic, and they also had regulars that would come on all the time and who were friends with the host and would have natural chemistry with them to make for a really good show. Now, another reason that these shows are so bad is a topic I just touched on, where they are politically charged and they spread the liberal Hollywood agenda. And I'm not saying like, ooh, fuck libtards. I don't give a fuck about politics, but it's obvious. They all talk about the same shit. When every time a mass shooting happens, fucking Jimmy Kimmel comes out with his fucking crocodile tears, and it's just gross. It doesn't belong in that platform, and it's one of the reasons why people are straying away from it now, because it's no longer a place to relax, have fun, and enjoy some television. Now it's having Second Amendment should be banned, knocked into your TV watching brain. And that's no good. Now, what I can talk about is what the two greatest talk show hosts of all time, what they did right, and why those shows were so important to American culture, and important to comedy, and important just to the entire landscape of America. And the first one is, he's the king of late night. He is Johnny Carson. Sorry. Johnny Carson. He deserves a better intro than that. But Johnny Carson is widely considered the greatest talk show host of all time. He was so extremely ingrained in American society. Everyone watched The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. It inspired so many comedians. It was an outlet for comedians to gain fame and for to reoccur and get their face back in the public image, because Johnny Carson, first thing we're going to talk about is he was extremely passionate about comedy, and he had a great love of comedy and comedians. Johnny Carson frequently had his comedian friends on the show, and they were always phenomenal because, like I said earlier, they had that natural chemistry because they were already friends in real life. They weren't having to force anything. It's not Jimmy Fallon sitting down with Ellen. It's Johnny Carson sitting down with Don Rickles or Jonathan Winters, people who were his actual friends in real life, who he wanted to give the opportunity to come on the biggest show in America and showcase their talents and show how funny they are and promote their stuff, their comedy albums or whatever it may be. The next thing that Johnny Carson did was he had young comedians, never been on television before, and he would have them on his show to perform stand-up for the first time. And it was just like never seen before, that someone giving these people, never been on television, no TV experience, the platform on the biggest show ever to make people laugh and to showcase their talents. And it became a legendary thing in the stand-up community, and they called it being anointed by Johnny Carson. What he would do is, if you impressed and you killed on the show as one of these new stand-ups, he would call you over to the couch. And when he calls you over to the couch, that basically means you made it. You were an instant superstar if Johnny Carson called you over to the couch to talk to you. And some of the biggest names in stand-up of all time have got their career because of that, like Jerry Seinfeld, Roseanne Barr, Stephen Wright, and Ray Romano, David Spade, many, many more. Many comedians have come from that. Drew Carey was another one. He got the Drew Carey show immediately, like after doing that, which skyrocketed him to incredible fame and fortune. And this is like probably the greatest thing about Johnny Carson. Like, he never had to do that And it's one of the reasons why the show was so good, because it was a comedy show. He was exposing the American people to these great comedians because he just loved it so much and he had a passion for it. And that's something that is completely lost with these new Tonight shows, because now they only have big name comedians on. There's rarely ever stand-ups, like just performing stand-up on these shows anymore. And if they are, it's Louis C.K. Well, probably not him anymore. No, let me change that. Louis C.K. is probably never being on a late night talk show ever again. But yeah, it would be people like that, Bill Burr, stuff like that. And then now, oh yes, another point for Johnny Carson is that he was extremely personable. He knew how to talk to people. It didn't have to be completely written out and planned, and he flowed extremely well with any guest. That's like one of the biggest things people say about Johnny Carson, is he was like the greatest communicator ever. And he has fantastic interviews with people because it's the perfect blend of using his wit and his sense of humor to relate with them, and then also he would cover more serious subjects too. It wasn't always just straight on about the laughs, but he would intertwine it to make incredible interviews that were funny and get to learn more about the person. It was an actual talk show. It wasn't this Mickey Mouse bullshit that we see now. But yes, Johnny Carson was incredibly talented. The great Johnny Carson. He was a very talented man. But now we're going to talk about the second guest. He's a very funny man, and I would say the second greatest talk show host of all time, and that would be David Letterman. Now we're going to talk about David Letterman. Sorry, I had to do my Johnny Carson impression. Not like that's ever been done before. But now we're going to talk about David Letterman, who was Johnny Carson's protege. If you don't know the history, David Letterman worshipped Johnny Carson, and he was his idol, and his dream was to take over The Tonight Show after Johnny Carson left. And then there's the whole history of, Johnny Carson wanted him to replace him, but then Jay Leno got the deal, and David Letterman and Jay Leno hated each other because of it. And then, but out of that, we ended up getting Late Night with David Letterman. Is the second greatest talk show of all time, which, as I said before, is now taken over by Stephen Colbert, which is great. That's amazing. That's so perfect. Because David Letterman, he was fantastic. He followed a very similar structure that Johnny Carson did, including bringing on new stand-up comedians, and it was almost as big as getting on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. He exposed America to many more famous comedians, including the greatest of all time, Norm Macdonald, made his first appearance on David Letterman, and David Letterman was his hero. And so he exposed many other fantastic comedians, and he, as well as Johnny Carson, always had comedians on his show, and he had reoccurring guests, just like Johnny Carson would, who he really meshed well with, really respected, and he would make their careers, and they would make great entertainment on the show, just as Johnny Carson did. But David Letterman had a couple other things. David Letterman was so funny. Johnny Carson was a bit more serious, and Johnny Carson also didn't, he never tried to take up the spotlight. He always let it be on the guest and just kind of like fuel the flames. But David Letterman, not that he took the spotlight away, but David Letterman was so naturally funny and quick-witted that he gelled extremely well with his guest, and he was able to make funny jokes about anything with any guest. He was so relatable. He was the man of the people. He had an extreme effect on American culture, just like Johnny Carson did. He changed the way people talked. People started using phrases that are now ingrained in in culture just from watching his show. And he was extremely just likable and also very good at talking to people. He can make anyone feel comfortable and gain great entertainment out of it. So both these guys had that just perfect amount and that perfect blend of being able to get real information out of them, not having to overwrite and control and script things because they were so naturally talented at just talking to people. And that's why these conversations now on these late night shows feel so fake. It's because they are fake. Every talk show has writers, including the talk shows that I mentioned, David Letterman and The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. But these were more based on, these writers, I'm sorry, I'm retarded, were more for monologues that they would do in the beginning of the shows, as well as just ripped. Doy, anyone home? Anyone home? Scripted jokes and bits that they would do. But now, it's pretty much the entire conversation is laid out on these talk shows. And that is no good. You definitely do not want that. Because why would you want to just watch a fake conversation? What enjoyment or nuance are you going to get out of watching two people just read a script to each other and laugh along and act like it's real? Really? You went to Santa Barbara? Yeah, that's so funny. No, that's not how it works. But what I can say is that these talk shows will not get better. They will stay like this, and they're probably going to vanish from existence entirely, which is sad because Johnny Carson's show and David Letterman's show, and even Conan O'Brien is very good too, but he wasn't on the same level as Letterman or Carson. But Conan was the last good one, who's also no longer going. So now we're really fucked. But these talk shows were very important to American culture, and they gave people really good opportunities, especially comedians, and now that avenue is lost. And people say that podcasts have replaced that, but that's not true, because podcasts suffer from the exact same thing that these Tonight shows suffer from now, where there's too fucking many of them. So it gets diluted. These comedians, they're not going to be seen or cared about as much. It's not as huge as a spotlight. The only closest thing is if you get on the Joe Rogan podcast. That definitely has an impact on your career as a comedian. But nothing will ever compare to what those talk shows did for people. And that is going to be lost. But what I can say is that we have a thing called the internet. This thing right here. And there's hundreds of hours that you can go and watch Johnny Carson Tonight Show clips and David Letterman late night clips and be completely entertained and satisfied with that. So, in a way, they say legends never die. And that's true in a way, because with these entertainers, their content never vanishes. It will be on the internet forever. So even when things are looking grim, always just go back to the good stuff. Watch any of Johnny Carson's appearances with Don Rickles, Ronnie Dangerfield, Jonathan Winters, Bob Hope. Any of these appearances, they're going to be funny. They're entertaining. They still hold up, even though it's from the 70s and 80s. It still holds up. And same goes with David Letterman. Norm Macdonald, his final David Letterman. It's one of the greatest stand-up appearances of all time on anything. It's one of the greatest sets of all time. And you can go and you can watch that on repeat and laugh every time. And David Letterman was also just an amazing interviewer, has many funny clips with many funny guests. And that's all I can say is, yeah, it sucks, but just go watch the old stuff. It's always better anyway.